Please make some noise for Lauren Mason!
Marvelous to be here with all of you. I'm from New York, and when I tell people that, they say, I love the Big Apple. It's such an amazing city. What are you doing here? Well, folks, have you heard about New York? If you can make it there, you can make it anywhere. I didn't make it. So now I'm trying to become a Swedish comedian. Which is hard because I don't speak Swedish. That's a little bit misleading. I don't actually live in Sweden. I live in Malmö. So you know about it. It's funny, Malmö has a bit of a dangerous reputation, and I didn't know that until this summer I had a friend come down from Göteborg. Anyways, he was starting to sweat, sort of like I am now, and I said, Gustav, why are you so nervous? And he said, when I told the people in Göteborg I was coming down, they said, be careful. And I said, is it really that bad? And he goes, oh yeah, they had 15 murders. I said, oh my goodness, last week? No, last year, he said. I said, oh, well, that's a bad weekend in New York. A terrible Tuesday in Chicago. Or just Black Friday at Walmart. Thank you. You know, you're making me feel really comfortable, but I can't get fully comfortable here. I don't know if it's the lack of gun violence in Walmarts, but I think it's because when I go out of my apartment, people are working out all the time. There's people who are jogging. There's old women with sticks. Doing God knows what. In the United States, when I see somebody and they're running, it's because they're high on crack. And they're chasing after a donut. I felt a little nervous coming up here, but now I feel like you're just a really great crowd, and I'm glad to get to know you. And I hear in these specials that you're supposed to use some vulnerability. So I wanted to open myself up to you now tonight. It was never my dream to live in Sweden. To dig a little deeper, it was never my dream to be a stand-up comedian, so don't feel bad. Actually, like many young men in New York, my dream was to become a hardcore rapper. But I couldn't take the bullets. The closest I ever got was writing some jokes that rhyme. So would you like to hear some rhyming jokes tonight, folks? All right. Let's see what I got off the top of my head. I'm going to feel like I'm back in the cypher, back in New York. All right, here we go. Given the birth rate, porn is great because more people should stay home and masturbate. Watch your head on that joke. You get it. That joke doesn't usually do well in Sweden because of statistics, but you should see it kills in India. Enough commentary. I know we came for rhymes. Let me see if I can kick one more. Instead of a 6, maybe it's a 4. All right, here we go. 8 billion is more than enough. If you're due with more than 3 kids, stay away from the muff. Maybe I should just, before I move on, just invite you to one more rhyming joke before I move on to ones that don't rhyme. What do you think? Yeah. All right, you're with me. Great. My father was a carpenter, and he said, son, you're a chip off the old block, but he's also a merchant seaman. So does that make a drip off the old cock? I wonder, is anybody out there into fantasy? You know, that's the one with the elves, dwarves, libertarians. All right. I see one really excited guy in the back row. Yeah, there you go. Hanging loose back there, man. So do you have a favorite, you know, fantasy television series, book series, coloring books?
I want to say My Little Pony.
My Little Pony. I think that we're talking about the wrong kind of fantasy here. I got some jokes later for guys like you. I'll come back to you. Thank you. If you give the statistics, there's at least one in every crowd, and this isn't even a Catholic church. You get it. Thank you. You know, what about all those classic ones? You know, it was weird because I grew up with Lord of the Rings, you know that. But it hurt me as I got older because I realized they have about as many black people on there as the Ku Klux Klan. You know, the thing is that turned me off a little bit. But as you can tell, growing up, I was a bit of a strange kid. I really struggled to read books. And I wasn't allowed to have a television, so I never knew what one was like. But I did play a fantasy game maybe you've heard of. It's called Dungeons and Drag Queens. You know, things were much simpler when I was younger with fantasy. Now they have all this weird stuff like, you know, Game of Thrones. I recognized quickly that was just a thinly veiled attempt by HBO to normalize pornography. But it was a little too violent for me. So I'm watching this new program, and it's riveting. I think you should check it out. It's about old women with digestive problems. It's called Game of Crones. Some people, their fantasy shows that they like actually correlate to what they like in the bedroom. I hate to bring this up, but it's true. Off the top of my head, Lord of the Rings, those people are into little people, dwarf play, that sort of thing. And Game of Thrones, S&M, bondage. And Harry Potter, those people are into absolutely everything. As long as it has nothing to do with trans women. Am I treading on the wrong turf? You know, as I like to say, it's truly an honor. I'm grateful for each and every one of you. It's wonderful to be here with you. And it was so nice to have Marco Moretti here because I was with Marco just a year ago. I'm so lucky because I get to travel around the world and do comedy. And I was in Milan visiting Marco. And Italy's amazing. I sort of wish I was there right now. It was such good food. The weather was kind of nice, you know. And being in Milan, it was special because I don't know if you know, Milan is the fashion capital of the world. The fashions change, if not every season, every year. But based on their last election, I realized that there's one thing that never goes out of style. Fascism. Speaking of fascism, I'm not going to mention Sweden, don't worry. I was back in the United States, and I was doing some comedy, and it was fun being in New York, but it's really nice being back in Europe again because I got a little sick of wearing the bulletproof vest. It seems like the U.S. is no longer a progressive first world nation, like Poland. But we still do some things better than anyone. Off the top of my head, gun violence, Black Friday, and black anti-Semitism. You've decoded it? That's my Kanye West joke. Thank you. Before I move on, I have to say, Kanye's done some amazing things. He may or may not win a Grammy. He impregnated a Kardashian twice, which many rappers have tried and failed. And he would fit right in Italy because he's passionate about both fashion and fascism. But he seems to have outdone himself in 2022 when he was named Anti-Semite of the Year. Suck on that, Viktor Orban. I would tell you the rest of my Orban jokes, but I want to leave you hungry for more. Wow. I see we have some Hungarians out there, and I really don't want to continue to Budapester you. Wordplay is not for everybody, I get that. Speaking of not for everybody, does anybody out there know about getting laid with an eggplant? I'm sorry, I see a lot of blank faces. Despite the success of Brexit, some English people might be here. And I like to be politically correct. So, aubergine? This is a really strange thing that has been going on lately, and it sort of freaked me out. But since I'm such a fan of context, I wanted to let you know my background with dating, and this will all make much more sense. You see, my father was an interesting guy, sort of a tough guy in some ways, and he sat me down one day and he goes, "Son, this is basically how dating works. You meet a nice girl, or in your case, maybe a guy, and you get their phone number, and then you go out on a nice date. And way back when, this was done with the watchful eye of a chaperone. And then you go out for many dates, and then the magical moment comes, and you lean in for your first kiss. And it's amazing. And if you're lucky, you get to fondle some tits. And after you fondle tits for a couple of years, before you know it, you're engaged. And then on the wedding night, Shazam! Neither of you are virgins anymore." And he said, "And that's how it worked for everybody, forever, except for sailors, hookers, and priests." And I said, "Thank you, Father." I grew up actually Christian. I was baptized Catholic, but I found the priest's private sermons a little too touching. I think it's because I went in really naive, you know. I thought that altar boys was a plural noun. But now I know it's a verb. I know that some of you are ahead of me, so I'm just caught up. For all of you who are Norwegian out there, I'll use it in a sentence. In the priest's chambers is where they altar boys. Okay. I can see you didn't like that. To keep rolling along, you know, I just wanted to say that, believe it or not, given that background, my parents were actually pretty strict growing up when it came to pedophilia. Which is maybe why they got me out of the church. You know, they were so strict, in fact, that they would not even allow me to get a pedicure because they were worried about me being touched by a pedophile. So I got manis instead, and that's why my shrink tells me that there's a good probability that I'm a closeted homosexual. Just kidding, I never got a manicure. You know, I was talking to my father, who's a strong, self-made man, and he played American football. He actually played a whole season with a broken arm, which was pretty amazing. Tough guy. And I was home, and I was sitting down with him, and he said, "You know, I saw the most amazing thing." He said, "I have a friend who has a 14-year-old daughter, and she's a linebacker on the football team." And I said, "Well, that's great." And he goes, "Yeah, I go to the games, and I support her." I said, "Well, that's really good, Pop. I'm happy that you're supporting her." And he goes, "Yeah, she's such an amazing young lady. I'm thinking of telling her father if I were a pedophile." And I said, "Let me stop you right there. There's nothing you're going to say that man is going to like." And he goes, "You're right. She plays football. She's probably a dyke anyways." That's my dad. And so it was really tough for me growing up because you would think with that kind of, direction that he might have been a priest, but he's not. He's actually the opposite, which was hard. He's an atheist. And so I had a hard time because, I was actually, it's weird because you'd think that, being an atheist, he should be into really old women, which would be the opposite of a priest, But it was hard for me because I was into older women, and I would go and try to get some fatherly advice, and he would sit me down, and I would say, I'm having lady troubles. And my father would sit and have a sip of bourbon, and he'd say, if you're having girl problems, I feel bad for you, son. I've had a few, but a 99-year-old bitch ain't one. And then he'd hit me. I'm just kidding. My father never abused me physically. On a somewhat unrelated topic, by round of applause, does anybody out there know what gaslighting is? Gaslighting is when a group of people get together and try to make somebody feel insane. It's not unlike what an audience does to a stand-up comedian. And it's a pretty big deal. It was Merriam-Webster's word of the year in 2022, so it shows you what your neighbors were up to during the pandemic. You see, I was out on the golf course this summer with some friends, and we were talking about guy stuff. And at one point, one of my friends says, I really don't understand what gaslighting is. And my other friend says, that's because there's something wrong with you. And I said, he's right, it's because you're crazy! I feel like you're gaslighting me right now, but I'll never let it go. Speaking of being gaslit, does anybody out there, by round of applause, has tried this dieting? Anybody do any dieting out there? Nobody needs to. It's Sweden. You're working out all the time. That's great. Wow, you're such a fit crowd. I'm happy to be among you. Well, since there are no dieters and you probably aren't going to try it, here's one diet you may want to try someday. It's pretty simple. It's called the seaweed diet. Have you heard of it? First you seaweed, and then you smoke it. I started out with high expectations, but the munchies are so I want to move on, and I want to say that I do take a lot of criticism. Some people say, Lauren, why aren't you more equal opportunity with your drug jokes, preferring to focus on weed and smokable cocaine? It's not that I'm against crystal meth. I'm just attached to my teeth. I'm a parent, and like any good parent, I follow a lot of these international pedophile rings. And have you ever noticed that when they get busted, the only person who ever gets caught is Prince Andrew? Right? It's like Interpol shows up every time, and they're like, what? Prince Andrew again? And he goes, we were just baking biscuits. And they just let him go, And so I wanted to ask, did anybody out there start any hobbies during the pandemic? Sourdough bread starter, worm farm, torturing ants? When I was doing it, I started making vegetables because my hobby was drinking and driving. That joke usually kills. Or at least manslaughters. A lot of stuff changed in the United States during the pandemic. Seriously, it's not the same place if you've been back there. And I was there, and you know what changed, which is really weird? Has anybody out there tried this thing called speed dating? Do you know about this? For those of you who haven't, you meet a bunch of people for 3 minutes, and if you're really lucky, you never have to see them again. And so basically, how it goes now in the United States is you just smoke a bunch of crack and go meet hookers. In other words, it's like partying with Hunter Biden. It is an election period. You know, it's funny because there's all sorts of new traditions in the United States. But perhaps the most troubling one, I don't know if you know about these emotional support animals, or ESAs. Do you know about this? Okay, a lot of shaking heads out there. You see, it used to be in the old days that only like seeing eye dogs could ride in the cabin with normal human beings. But no longer. Now you can have like feral cats, wild squirrels, like Joey kangaroos, wild turkeys, and they're all shitting on the seats. That's okay. You know, if you need that support, I get it. But what about us normal people who, to get from A to B on an airplane, only need, you know, a couple little airplane bottles of wild turkey bourbon. We don't need an actual wild turkey to hold our hands. And I may sound a little bitter, but because I had a very strange situation, and now is a very exciting point for, I think, for all of us in this show, because I like to ask the audience to use their imaginations. So I want you to imagine that I'm the kind of guy who might take a marijuana edible and get on an airplane. And I was flying maybe, say, from New York to Cancun. And I go and I settle into my seat. And it's really nice and cozy there. And I had 2 seats open next to me. I was next to the window. And like any good person, I was hoping that the flight would be a little bit undersold so that I could have at least a couple seats to myself. And I got my little airplane bottle of wild turkey, and I take it straight like my beer. And I feel like this is going to be a great flight. And then something terrible happens. I look in the aisle, and I see this man in a yellow hat walking down the aisle, middle-aged guy. And in front of him, with him, he has this little monkey. And it's dressed up in a little purple leisure suit. And it has a little purple fedora attached to its head. Maybe it was stapled. I don't know. And he's coming down the aisle, and this isn't like some benign monkey like you might find in a children's book. This monkey had the demeanor of like a tough young chimp pimp. I swore that as he came down, he had intro music like a boxer as he comes down the aisle like this. And I swear somewhere I heard 50 Cent rapping, "I'm a motherfucking CHIMP." And I was about to find out, chimping ain't easy. So the little guy settles into his seat, and he pulls out a couple knitting needles and starts knitting a little sweater. And I think, how did he get those through security? That turned out to be the least of my worries. So after we get up to altitude, the little guy gets a little bit restless. And he starts squirming out of his seat. And he comes over to mine, and he puts his hand, and it lands directly on my rod. And I think, oh, this is an accident. But it clearly wasn't an accident when he started giving me an over-the-pants hand job. And so I looked, and I wanted to see how this was registering with him, and his beady little eyes were really enjoying it. And that's when I realized I'm not dealing with some benign children's book monkey. I'm dealing with Bi-Curious George. Which is a whole nother pile of bananas. So I started to freeze up a little bit, I admit, you know. But then I got this amazing thought in my head. I thought, you know, you're a comedian. And I thought, you know, there's a lot of unimaginative amateurs who might join the Mile High Club by having sex in a first-class bathroom. But how many people get jerked off by a monkey and coach? So I was flying with that for a little while, and then I had this other thought, and I said, no, wait a second, this is how AIDS got started. But I was so emotionally scarred when I was there, I had to get a support monkey for the ride home. So I decided to go out and make a child. And it turned out to be the best decision I've ever made in my life. I have this beautiful little girl who is my heart, and I absolutely love her. It's funny, though, parenthood is hard and full of sacrifices. In the United States, for example, it's gotten so hard that so many parents now, I can see why they're switching from coffee to meth. And we made that hard choice not to have that meth in the house. Then we had to have one more worry, which was that our daughter might become a serial killer. I know that white males have sort of cornered the market, but you never know, a little girl might get through there. I'm sad to report that she has. First, she killed my sleep. Then she strangled my patience. And finally, she murdered my sex life. But I don't want to sound bitter because I don't want to leave you on a low note tonight because you've been so wonderful. So what I'd like to do is to give you one more rap to uplift you. How do you feel about one more rap, folks? Wow. I love your energy. Since there's so many wonderful, beautiful young ladies out there tonight, I would like to dedicate this rap to the ladies, if that's all right. So what I need is just a little help from you. I'd like you to put your hands together like this. You get it. All right, here we go. Off the top of the dome, to take it home, what do we got? Men spend too much time obsessing over the size of their penises when they should be spending more time with their heads between the thighs of their Venuses. You've been an amazing audience, and I've loved every second of this, so I feel like I owe you something. Not too much. But let me at least give you a nice little tip. I wanted to tell you, for all of you out there thinking of having children, it's really hard and full of sacrifices, so consider not doing it. Thank you. Sort of the theme of my show. So I wanted to thank you. You guys have been such an amazing audience. And so to give you this last tip, I want to really send it home. So I've really had to make a lot of sacrifices. And I made the ultimate sacrifice, I feel. I gave up smoking marijuana. So I've started having gay sex in Saudi Arabia. Because I still want to get stoned. Thank you very much. You've been a marvelous audience. Thanks to each and every one of you who came. And I would love to stick around and tell more jokes, but I'm very disciplined, and I promised myself I would go running tonight. So I'm off to smoke a little crack. And find that donut to chase. I love you, Malmo. Thank you so much. Good night.